In violence prevention and self-defense, we talk a lot about red flags, and they are important, but so are recognizing yellow flags and also the green flags. Because if we're just constantly looking for the bad, we might overlook the green, right? Or we might misinterpret something as a red flag, which is actually really a yellow, and it needs to be addressed. And then what's that reaction after?
Coming to you from the 80/20 Conflict Management Headquarters in Edmonton, Alberta, this is the Timeline of Self-Defense with your host, Randy King.
What is up, Internet? Welcome to the Timeline of Self-Defense. Yeah, it's still a podcast, but we've just stolen the pacing from a late-night show, because safety tips go down way better with a few laughs. This is all built around my self-defense model, the same one in my book, The Timeline of Self-Defense Before, During, and After Violence, coming out May 5th from YMAA Publishing. You're basically watching the second edition happen in real time, as I bring in experts from every stage of the model, before, during, and after. For the full interview, all 10 of my questions, my extra feedback, the outtakes, and unedited conversations, or to book me for a keynote conference, martial arts workshop, or self-defense program, head to randykinglive.com. Everything you need, including my socials, is right there. Now let's kick off the show with Red Flags and Reality.
Welcome to Red Flags and Reality, the part of the show where we take the headlines you might scroll past and turn them into lessons that actually make you safer. Today we're in the before phase of the timeline, awareness and boundaries. Your friend asking for your Netflix password could actually land them in jail. Sounds wild, right? But in May 2025, Queensland passed Hannah's Law, making coercive control, things like forced passcode sharing, emotional manipulation, even constant tracking, a criminal offense. We are talking up to 14 years in prison. And it's not just an Australia thing. In Canada, where I live, coercive control has been recognized as family violence since 2021. That means courts can issue restraining orders or even change custody when those patterns show up. And here's the part we don't like to admit. Abuse rarely starts with a punch. It starts with small stuff that gets brushed off as caring. I just want to know where you are. You can trust me with your phone. It's no big deal. But those no big deal moments are often the setup for bigger control. If the courts see it as serious enough to intervene, we should see it as serious enough to start setting harder boundaries. Real self-defense starts way before anyone throws a punch. It starts the moment you recognize control for what it really is and decide you're not okay with it. Now let's talk about prevention. On April 30th, 2025, the Youth Endowment Fund and the Home Office in the UK announced a plan for every school in England and Wales to appoint a specialist in relationship violence. £8,000 per school was given to bring in someone who could teach lessons on dating and abuse, coercion, and stalking. Are working. They saw a 17% drop in teenage partner violence. That's huge. Why? Because when kids learn to spot red flags early and actually have the language to call them out, the patterns don't escalate. They also learn how to be better bystanders, which changes the whole social environment. This is what prevention looks like. It's not just about teaching kids how to date. It's about teaching them how to stay safe, how to push back when their boundaries are tested, and how to step in when they see someone else is in trouble. That is self-defense before it ever gets physical. And here's something that might bend your brain a little bit. On August 1st, the Financial Times reported what they are calling the Great Crime Paradox. Violent crime rates across first world countries are at historic lows, but people feel less safe than they did 10 years ago. That's the paradox. So what's going on? Sensational headlines and constant social media outrage make rare events feel like they're lurking around every corner. We don't just hear about the worst case scenarios, we live in them, in our feeds all day long. And when you're constantly on edge because of scary stories instead of actual risks, you make different decisions and not always good ones. Awareness isn't about living scared, it's about seeing clearly. Tuning out the noise and focusing on what's real makes you harder to manipulate and way more prepared. And here's some good news. In 2024, researchers found that trauma-informed programs like practicing boundary setting, sense skills, and recognizing coercion early significantly reduce people's risks of victimization. Think about that. Just learning to say no, practicing it until it's unshakable, changes how predators see you. Self-defense isn't just about blocking hits, it's about building the kind of presence that makes you harder to target in the first place. And that's not just a theory, that's evidence-based prevention. So here's the big picture. Awareness isn't paranoia, it's prevention. Whether it's laws catching up to coercion, schools teaching red flags, or you practicing a confident no, the first line of self-defense isn't what you do in a fight, It's what you do long before one even starts. My guest today knows what it takes to bring trauma-informed coaching into the self-defense space. She's a self-defense coach who spent the last 8 years building programs that go beyond the dojo, helping healthcare workers, educators, and everyday people approach personal safety in a whole new way. When it comes to the before phase of self-defense, preventing violence before it starts, she is doing groundbreaking work. Pamela Armitage, welcome to the show. Let's jump in. You teach the boundaries start before words. Can you unpack what those invisible first steps look like and why they matter so much?
Boundaries are a huge part of prevention. You know, a lot of people pay lip service to boundaries, place boundaries. You got to be firm in boundaries and don't let someone cross your boundaries. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. It's lip service. And for a lot of people, they don't know where to start. They have no idea how to place boundaries. And there's many reasons for that. That can be from, depending on what their childhood was like. There can be things like, a religious or cultural or even just a family dynamic where there was a lot of oppression. There was a lot of, being told what to wear, what to eat, what to drink, what you can and can't say, these sorts of things. So to come out of a situation like that, it's not just a switch that you can flick on. Place boundaries now when you were never taught that. So boundaries, first and foremost, are not so easy with people. The first place, I'm going to kind of dive into a few different things here, but the first part of being able to place boundaries with other people is learning to place boundaries with yourself. If you cannot place a boundary with yourself, it's going to, and hold it and keep it, it's going to be that much more difficult for you to place a boundary on somebody else that you may encounter in your life. So boundaries with yourself, that's quite that's an onion. There's a lot of layers there and it can come in many different contexts. So I always kind of like in this day and age to use the example of, say, screen time, right? If you're someone who finds yourself maybe on your phone a little bit too much, which I think everybody listening to that, yes, definitely can relate to that, till you get into that doom scroll kind of, you don't even realize it. And next thing you know, an hour's gone by. You're like, holy crap, right? So that's, as we know, research has been very clear. Spending too much time on our phones is not good for our physical health. There's a lot of eye issues, neck problems, physical ailments that can come from that, as well as our mental health and sleep patterns, all sorts of things. So, placing a boundary with yourself around screen time is one good way to start, and it can start small. I think that's really important, is that we start small, because if we start too big, then it can feel a bit too daunting and we can potentially set ourselves up for failure. And that takes a toll on our self-confidence and follow through and other things, right? So it can be things like screen time. It can even be things like, maybe I want to be a little bit more active. So how am I going to start with that boundary? I'm going to make myself go for a walk for 10, 15 minutes every morning before I start. We start small and then maybe we gradually build on that. And you can even look at these as keeping small promises to ourselves, right? It's for our betterment. So it's really about looking at ourselves, areas that we want to improve on in our life. I know that this is a self-defense podcast, but this really transcends just the topic of violence, right? If we want to be able to prevent, we need to first look at ourselves and what it is in our lives that maybe we want to improve ourselves on. And that can be health, exercise, screen time. Like I said, it can be a variety of things. Maybe we work too much. Maybe we need to start giving ourselves a day off a week for someone who's a workaholic, right?
This transcends violence. And I've always said good self-defense skills are good life skills. This does transcend it, right? Self-defense isn't just this violence thing. It's a whole bunch of other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And, self-defense is violence prevention, abuse prevention. These are life skills. But just look at the statistics alone out there on how many people experience violence in some degree. Violence isn't always physical. It's actually more often than not psychological. And I think a lot of people overlook that. They get stuck in the physical. They think self-defense, they think, a strike, a punch, whatever. And most physical violence anyway, as far as antisocial violence goes, we're looking at ambushes. That's a big thing we've discovered in all our research, is you're not going to see it coming. right? But there's going to be a long line of red flags beforehand. And if we don't, a lot of that red flag comes from ourselves, our self-awareness and our intuition and catching things, but we dismiss it and we didn't put a boundary up, or we did and they crossed it, but we gave them a free pass and all of these things. So the boundaries with self are really important because they increase your self-confidence. You're improving your life, your well-being, and even just how you value yourself. If you value yourself, other people are going to value you as well. And you're going to recognize where the green flags come up. I know in violence prevention and self-defense, we talk a lot about red flags, and they are important, but so are recognizing yellow flags and also the green flags. Because if we're just constantly looking for the bad, we might overlook the green, right? Or we might misinterpret something as a red flag, which is actually really a yellow, and it needs to be addressed. And then what's that reaction after? Does a red or green flag pop up after that? That is a little bit, it's almost like an investigation into and profiling, if you will, of the individual in front of you. And a lot of people focus that on intimate partner, but it's not just about intimate partner. It's about people we work with, and it's about neighbors. And, there's a long line of relationships in our life. It's not just about intimate partner. It's friendship, it's in-laws, it's family, it's neighbors, it's coworkers, it's all acquaintances, all that stuff.
A lot of people, I think, confuse being nice with being safe. So how do you help people separate politeness from self-protection?
As anyone who's familiar, and you know this, Randy, with Rich and I's work, and these are Rich's quote unquote rules of de-escalation. The first one is always be nice. And that's not, it's not synonymous. Being nice doesn't mean being a doormat. Being nice doesn't mean being a pushover. Being nice doesn't mean letting someone cross your boundaries. There's a difference between that niceness and being a pushover, right? So it's about being polite, and you can be polite and calm and assertive. That's kind of the way to look at it, is that you're calm, assertive, and polite. And these things are great because if you don't know what type of person you're dealing with, that politeness and fishing for empathy as well, that's what it really comes down to. When you're nice, polite, courteous, it doesn't mean that you're cowering and all of that stuff. It's that you're fishing for the empathy, right? So in your communication, you are trying to fish for empathy with that person. I mean, we can't go into a huge deep dive into that and what I mean, and right, because that's an entire masterclass that we teach, right? But it's really important to differentiate that difference there, because I think a lot of people hear when we say always be nice, that means, come walk all over me, right? When that's not remotely what we're saying at all. It's just about taking on that, that attitude, or that, how we present ourselves as being calm and assertive and polite, to fish for empathy from that person. There's strength behind that.
Yeah.
It's not weakness whatsoever. And I think that a big misconception, it's mostly, no offense to men, but there is a lot of men, we hear it all the time, is being nice and polite means that I'm weak.
Right.
I'm showing weakness. And that's not entirely true at all. If you are being a puppet to your ego and your anger, that's weakness.
Yeah.
You're letting your ego and your anger control you. You control you. You control yourself, not your ego, not your anger, and all of that.
That makes a ton of sense. And I love the way you phrase it. Like, I love that a lot of the onus is on us, right? I often say sometimes the worst part of your self-defense strategy is you. How can someone tell the difference between intuition and anxiety?
So self-awareness is huge here. And that takes work. There's some people that are very self-aware. What do I mean by self-awareness? Self-awareness is something that I think, regardless of the level that you're at, it's something we can always work on. And being able to differentiate between intuition and anxiety or paranoia is really where an anxiety will come from, is from a state of paranoia. Intuition generally starts with the feeling.
Right.
It's an instinct, and generally what we do is we start to question it, most of us. This is obviously areas of gray here. Why do I feel this way? Where is this coming from? And we kind of almost dismiss it, whereas the paranoia starts with the thought first, right? It can be something that we're maybe not even consciously aware of. It can be a judgment about someone, the way someone looks. Maybe we need to be self-aware of our own. Maybe we have discrimination about the way certain people look. And I don't necessarily mean racism, but maybe someone who's dressed like a biker you instantly think they're part of a biker gang, or maybe they're not. And then that, that kind of that paranoia triggers off. It can even be something, if you've been binge watching for way too long, something on Netflix, and, someone looks like, you're looking at everyone like they're an unsub from Criminal Minds or something, right? So there's that kind of, we have to be self-aware. And I'm not trying to pay lip service to that, but self-awareness is key in being in tune with our intuition. Intuition is something that is still being heavily researched. A lot of research in the past that has been done has been more intuition relating to business. A lot of the research that you'll find is that, but there's still, like, the Heart Institute in Spain has done a lot of research on intuition. And so there's a lot of things we can do to build on it.
Yeah.
And it's part of self-awareness. And that is a big part of it, is looking in our past. And can we recall certain incidents where our intuition went off and it was right? Something happened. It doesn't have to necessarily be around violence. It can be about a car that you were buying.
Yes.
Something felt off, but the salesman was so good that you fell for his lines.
Sure.
And then that car turned out to be a lemon, just as one example, right? It comes in many formats.
Yeah.
Intuition isn't just about danger to our well-being. It can be about literally anything. So can we reflect back on our intuition? And can we reflect on when it was bang on, and how did it manifest? Was it a physical feeling, butterflies? Was it a voice in our head saying, nah, something's off? Was it the hair on the back of our head, our neck, stood out? What is it? There's going to be at least one, maybe a multitude of things that popped up there, and kind of keeping that journal. Journaling is a really important tool, and being able to tell the difference. If you're someone who has struggled with anxiety for many, many years now, you become very aware. Once you start doing the work, the healing work to self-awareness and all of that stuff, you become aware of what anxiety is.
Yeah.
When it's coming up, you can feel that trigger. You know when it's coming. And sometimes when you start to become very self-aware, you will recognize what it is that has triggered it.
Right.
And so that is really important. Again, just like boundaries, this is not a switch that you can just flick on and off. It takes self-reflection. It takes work. Therapy is really, really great, but not all therapists are created equal. There's some really crappy ones out there, just like any other human being in a profession, right?
Yeah.
So someone who's trauma informed and always, up to date on latest trauma research, all that kind of thing. So working with, a therapist, if you come from a very traumatic background and maybe some things you haven't dealt with, you have anxiety, working through being able to be self-aware with that. And it takes time to differentiate between the two, between intuition, building that intuition. But the more self-aware we become through boundary placing, through ourselves and through others, that confidence builds. It's a multitude of tools that we can engage to build boundary setting and then in tune intuition, right? There are no quick fixes. There are no quick answers when it comes to this stuff on yourself. That is more important than anything, because otherwise people are going to come in your life, and that's when you're going to be taken advantage of.
That makes
things you may get into that really danger area. Journaling is honestly, it's such a great tool. It really, first of all, for many reasons, the science, again, going back to science and logic and research and all that stuff, but really helps transform your neuroplasticity of your brain. It helps form new neural pathways. So journaling is a really important tool in building self-confidence, self-awareness, and becoming really familiar with who you are, learning who you are. And that's part of that intuition. So I think really reflecting back on those incidences and not just thinking about them, but writing it down. There is something to be said about the physical act of writing it down. Don't type it on your phone. A pen and a paper is much more effective in engaging the brain.
That makes sense to me. All right, so this is more of a personal question now. What was the hardest boundary you've ever had to set personally, and what did it teach you about your own approach to safety?
The hardest boundary I ever had to place. Oh my goodness.
I'm coming in hot with questions. I prepared for this one. It's weird for me to prepare.
I'm trying to think here. Wow. I think, I'm going to just go into a little bit of sharing of my past here.
If you don't mind.
And so before Rich and I ever met, for almost a decade, I was in a marriage that I didn't realize at the time until I got out of that marriage and was diagnosed with CPTSD, that there was emotional abuse going on. And much of that emotional abuse was not what I refer to as intentional. There was some intentional, absolutely, but it was living in a house of eggshells, right? So him having his own trauma that he was not dealing with, anger issues, that you live in a house like that, you develop anxiety, you become, right? So there were not a lot of boundaries there because that life was survival. I never really felt like my life was in danger. Looking back now, I realize had I done things differently and said things differently and maybe made different choices, that maybe that would have been different, that answer. My life very much possibly could have been, depending on certain factors. But a lot of this is important too, just, sidetrack here when it comes to, abuse. There's a lot of people, regardless of their gender, they don't realize they're in that situation. They don't think of themselves in that situation until they're out of it, until they're getting help and they're getting support and they're getting therapy. And it was my therapist saying, that's called emotional abuse. What you went through, this, and that, blah, blah, blah. Yes, some of it was not directed at you, but you still had to live in it, right? It doesn't matter that
makes sense.
They're not directing it at you and throwing things at you and hitting you. They are still doing those things around you. And that's, and then once in a while lashing out at you, it's abuse. And so boundaries didn't really exist in that period of time because forget it, it was impossible. When Rich and I got together, we both had our own stuff, past experience, mine with this, his with a whole bunch of other stuff, which is not my story to share. But a lot of boundary setting came into our relationship because it was a learning process with us. We grew and learned together because I came from that. And so there was a complex of not being seen and heard, learning. And so some of that boundary was with myself. I had to place the hardest boundary with myself was breaking patterns and reactions and working on coping mechanisms, right? I was a fawn. I fawn to a point and then I go into fight because the fawning and the please and appease, it's better to call it please and appease because that's what it is. You reach a point where you're fed up, right? I'm sick and tired of, doing this and that and blah, blah, blah. And then you lash out. So the hardest boundary I think that I ever had to place was probably with myself in not being triggered, working on triggers, right? And trying to learn about ADHD and working with rather than when, I feel unseen or heard or I'm talking and he's elsewhere, that I need to change my approach and our communication had to change and trying to remind myself, he's not your past experience. He's proven himself over and over and over again about what a wonderful person he is and loving and communicative and emotionally intelligent, the most emotional intelligent person I've ever met. And so there was that constant kind of reminder to pause, learning to respond rather than react, right? And that's a lot of work. Journaling, coming back to that, helped a lot with that. So the hardest boundary was definitely myself, placing it with myself to unlearn patterns and unlearn reactions. And then with Rich, also that boundary of, I'm someone who needs a lot of alone time.
Right.
A lot. I definitely need me time to reflect and all of that stuff. And he's really good about it. So that was more of an easy boundary, but it was hard for me to place that boundary. I need this.
Yeah.
Right. And what's the reaction going to be? It's, that was a hard boundary, is unlearning patterns and reactions.
And I think I love pulling stuff out of what you're saying, right? So you answered the second part is how did that change your teaching style? Change it by understanding you got to do yourself first before you can kind of do others, right? It's almost not to dumb this down, but it's very much the airplane analogy, right? Like it's used ad nauseum, but it does apply. If you are not capable of taking care of yourself, how do you expect to be able to deal with another human being, right?
Yeah, it kind of goes into that whole cliche phrase, but that you can't serve from an empty vessel.
Yes.
You can't help people who don't want help, and you certainly are no good to anybody if you're not taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I can't.
You have to. It's not selfish. It is not selfish. And that perspective needs to change.
Yeah, I mentioned
Really.
it in my boundary setting course and in the book, of course, like the most generous people I know have the most rigid boundaries on their time I've ever seen. Like they're like, nope, this is my alone time. Nope, this is my reading time. Nope, but they're at soup kitchens, and because they're refilling their cup, right? They have the
Yes.
ability to pour because they know, and you can't. I don't think you could do that well without some kind of effect on your mental capacity. If you're just always giving, always giving, always giving, always giving, right? You're gonna
You
run
can
out.
do it for a certain amount
Yes.
of time, but you're going to burn out.
Exactly.
And burnout is honestly, it's becoming borderline, say, an epidemic.
Yeah.
And it's not just from people giving, but again, can go back to the beginning of what we were speaking about boundaries and screen time. And we are not wired and built, our nervous systems and our brains are not wired and built to be taking in the amount of information,
Yes.
especially the news and all the crap that's going on in the world 24/7 all the time. We're not wired for that. We haven't evolved as a species and as a society where that was normal. We were very much village, right? It takes a village, and we were in our own specific community, and that's what we knew and what we were exposed to. So, we've evolved so much as far as technology goes and reach.
Yeah.
And there's definitely benefits for it, but it's a recipe for burnout if we're not placing those boundaries with ourselves. Not to mention that if we have children, when you are placing boundaries with yourself and you're emulating that to your children.
Yes.
If you need to place boundaries with your children on screen time, blah, 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 you better be following the same rules,
Agreed.
because otherwise you look like a hypocrite.
Yes.
And nobody likes a hypocrite, and children are going to come to resent you for that. So you have to, it's a rule for the whole household, right? Not just kids, but everyone. And we all keep those rules.
I agree. I have the daughter I deserve. She's very much a mini me. And if I'm not doing it, she's not doing it, right? Well, why would I do it if you don't have to, right?
Yeah.
So you've worked with people who've survived trauma countlessly. That's what you guys do. What is your method of getting them to like kind of reclaim themselves, and how they teach them how to set boundaries when they might think it's impossible?
Great question. So when it comes to boundaries, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, there is a significant amount of people who come from a background of oppression. That oppression can come from many sources. I had mentioned, religious, cultural, even just a family dynamic. Religion and culture don't need to even be a part of the picture. You can just come from a domineering household where there was a domineering father or mother or grandparent or whoever it was. But there was a lot of oppression and control going on. And so placing boundaries, is, you can conceptualize it, but it's lip service. So to start small, this is actually a really great exercise. And Randy, you'll probably recall this because you took my trauma-informed teaching course. This is one that I teach in this course as well as our boundaries course. And it's small and it doesn't seem like much. But again, we're changing patterns and we're trying to, carve new neural pathways. And this is what I call the no. I'm giving this for free right now on this podcast. But again, you can find this in my course and our boundaries course, both the trauma-informed course and the boundaries course. And it's about saying no. Just the simple act of saying no is very difficult for some people, particularly those that are caught in fawn or please and appease. And so a great exercise for kids as well, to start teaching them young to learn how to say no. We take an object, it can be anything. We're talking about self-defense, so we could use a focus mitt, for example. And we ask the person if they know the answer to this, because some people don't. A food they don't like, a drink they don't like. So let's say, I hate olives. So let's use olives as an example. You and this person, child, adult, whoever it is, you work through this exercise, you place that object in front of them that represents whatever it is they hate, olives, and you say, I want you to eat these olives right now. All they have to do, and it's physical, it's not just the verbal, but the actual physical act is very important too. We push that object away and say, no, thank you, I hate olives. It's so small, but again, this is really important. I think a lot of people get stuck on this, is your students are not you. They're not you. They don't think like you. Their experiences are not you. Their perspective is not filtered through the same life experience and eyes as yours. So they're not you. And that's really, really important when we're teaching. So it might not seem like much, but to that person who doesn't even know how to say no to the smallest, seemingly insignificant thing, it's very important exercise to do.
Next question. In self-defense, people often jump straight to fight back. Why do you believe empowerment starts long before any physical response?
Why? I mean, that's such a loaded question, loaded answer.
Yeah.
And an onion, just fight back. Again, that's lip service. Just place boundaries. Just say no. Just trust your gut. The hell does that mean?
Yes.
Some people, how many people are probably like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I don't even know. I don't even trust myself, let alone, be able to do anything that you're saying. So, that empowerment, we want to prevent. Again, I can't stress this enough. Like I said at the beginning, there's a whole line of red flags that popped up before the ambush happened. And empowerment, part of that empowerment is the knowledge, and knowledge is power. Knowledge of self, learning about yourself. What are your triggers? What are your coping mechanisms? How does your intuition go off, like we had mentioned? How do I place boundaries? Where do I have some problems with boundaries? What boundaries are really hard for me to place for myself? Or what's my trigger points? Because a trigger isn't just something you emotionally react to. It can be something where your entire guard has now dropped and gone down and someone has crossed that line. So empowerment is really important beforehand, because if you don't have any of that stuff for prevention, if something unfortunately does happen physically, having the empowerment to fight back and go from fear to indignation. That's kind of the thing that I always teach is turn your fear into indignation. How dare you?
Yeah.
That's immediately, right? However, knowledge is power. So the knowledge of behavioral red flags, red, yellow, and green flags. And then you have, everyone goes on and on about situational awareness. Well, situational awareness is just the awareness of a situation as it's unfolding.
Yeah.
What about everything beforehand?
Yes.
Environmental awareness, always also super, super important, right? Because environment is like a co-star in a situation if it gets physical. So all of these things and that knowledge beforehand are super empowering because it helps control fear. I understand everything that's going on. I'm still feeling the fear, but I can work through it and I'm not going to freeze because I have information now. And a freeze response is very common because people don't have information.
Yes.
They're like a deer in headlights. I've never thought of this before. I don't know what to do. Or they haven't worked through past traumas that have caused them to freeze.
How do you help someone who feels like they freeze up every time they try to assert themselves?
Scenario training is a big part of that. And it's a complex question because why do they freeze every time they try to assert themselves? It's all very likely going to be from past experiences. So being able to, guide them and encourage them to work on reconciling, for lack of better words, the reasons why they freeze, right? Fear-based, past experience, it's just an automatic response. Being able to work through that. But I really think that scenario training isn't about physical.
Right.
That's just one type of scenario training. When someone freezes, we don't want to just throw them into a physical response, right? But it's very helpful that you're practicing with, organic and real energy behind it. And again, not necessarily real energy physically, but real energy on a vocal and communication level. And engaging in physical is in backing away and kind of getting them to practice that. It really takes time. But the fact that they're aware of it is one of the biggest obstacles right there that they've already gotten over. I'm aware I do this. I'm aware I'm having trouble on this. And now I want to work so I'm not. That right there is going to help them through a lot.
Awesome. So if you could leave the listeners with the most important thing or one big takeaway in the before phase of an encounter, what would that be?
Know yourself. What's that old age saying? Know thyself and you'll win 1,000 battles or whatever it is. It's so important. Violence comes in many forms. And if you know yourself and you work on self-awareness and you take care of yourself through all the things we just spoke about, the mother of self-defense is prevention. And that's what we want. We want to really try and focus on that if we can and get to know yourself and Once you have that, everything again that we spoke about, the likelihood of something happening is going to shrink significantly, just by knowing yourself and not shaming.
Absolutely.
The last thing we want is shaming,
Yeah.
right? We want to work through these things. It's okay. Learning to love yourself. I know a lot of people, it's so cheesy, but it's true.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it in a narcissistic way either. That's not self-love. That's something different.
Awesome, Pam. Thank you so much for your time. This was a fantastic conversation. So many amazing nuggets. Why don't you tell the people where they can get a hold of you, what you're promoting currently?
Okay. Thank you for having me on. Really, really appreciate it. Always love our conversations. As far as the shameless self-promotion, Rich and I have our masterclass in November. This is actually a knife prevention masterclass. So it's the first knife prevention masterclass we've done. It's in Montreal in November. I think you're going to link that. I sent you that link, so you'll see that link there, but it is on our website, rpsviolenceprevention.com. And that's going to be a combination of our 4-day Foundations of Violence masterclass combined with knife violence reality. So prevention as well as some defense kind of really. And this again is heavily based, everything we teach on research on the realities and the like. So that's the big one we want to push. And of course, on our yourselfdefenseexperts.com, we have a very extensive library of digital materials. Based on what we've talked about today, we actually have a few newer courses on there right now on boundaries, as well as an intensive course, which is about 8 hours, I think. And that's on life skills, on intuition, and all 4 of the awareness. So self, behavioral, situational, and environmental awareness as well. Those are some good courses that really, again, go on with what we talked about today.
This is guaranteed the first episode of the show. My book comes out May 5th through YMAA Publishing, Timeline of Self-Defense Before, During, and After Violence. Grab it, and if you need anything on me, randykinglive.com. Here's what I took away from this conversation. First, boundaries start with you. If you can't keep promises to yourself, like actually shutting off your phone at night, how are you going to hold the line with somebody else? 2, empowerment isn't about fighting back. It's knowing yourself, spotting the red and yellow flags early, and doing the work ahead of time so you are not blindsided. 3, intuition can be trained. Journaling and self-reflection help you tell the difference between my gut says something is off and my anxiety is lying to me. And if you're worried about freezing up when you try to assert yourself, start small. Practice saying no in low-stakes situations, even if it's just pushing away a food you hate, so your brain learns that you can stand up for yourself when it counts.